Hi guys. We're gonna start in a minute, but I want to ask everyone to come to the front because it's way nicer for the lecturer to like see a full all the people in the front and talk to them than that everyone's in the back. So all the rows from the back, come to the front, please. Dat is ook moeilijk, hè? Ja, precies. There's more space here. There's more space here. Yes. Thank you, guys. Then I would like to give the word to Gijs because he's gonna give us the lunch lecture. So thank you, Thijs. Gijs.
Yes, thank you for the introduction, and also thank you all for coming here today for the lunch lecture. And we're going to talk about how to design multimodal hubs. And because this will be some sort of a timeline, not only focusing on the hubs of today, I first want to go back to one very classic example, one of the godfathers perhaps of hubs, and perhaps you might all know this one, which is the classical station of Reuver. So I'm pretty sure you're quite familiar with it. Although I see some people smiling and some questionable faces. So I can continue for now, come back to it later. So for today, I first will give a small introduction about myself and the company I work for, the kinds of projects we do. Then we go to the main topic of the evening, today, which is the hubs. And really addressing this timeline, where they come from and what they are right now and what possible future is. And afterwards it's time for a summary and some questions and dialogue. So I'm Gijs van Bergen-Ingouwen. I'm an architect and I work at Studio SK. And at Studio SK we actually are a combined firm with architects, landscape architects and urbanists. So we're, I would say, medium size. We're not the biggest one, but we have all different people with all different expertise and background. And together with this, we also have constructors and building technologists within the same company. So we can really work together on integral and very complex assignments, which is very nice. But Studio SK is part of Movares, and Movares is actually a quite big engineering firm with around 1,000 people working there. So they're quite big. And looking at the history of Movares itself, used to be very long time ago part of the Dutch railway company, but later it split into 3 companies. The other 2 you might be familiar with, which is the NS, so where you take the train, and also ProRail, which is more of the tracks and the infrastructure itself. And so Movares is really related to that as the engineering firm. But besides trains and tracks, we also do a lot of different things. Also a lot future-proof things such as environmental, nature, but also with water and energy. And besides that, we also like to build like bridges, but also under the ground, the tunnels, really the bigger infrastructure topics. But now for hubs, that's probably why I think you've all been coming here. I would first like to ask a question. Does anyone know a hub? Have everyone been to a hub before? And you can just either raise your hand or just shout it out. Yes? So it's like a car company. I can. Yeah, so it is a hub. Hub's basically a place where different modalities come together. So for instance, the car hub, where you can pick up a car and then use it to go to your next mode of transportation. But for today, we will more likely be focusing on the hubs I'm very sure we've all been using, which are the train stations. Train stations used to be like the first hubs there were in the Netherlands. I can actually already see some kind of timeline here. So in the top left, we see Amsterdam Central Station. Next to it is Lelystad. The bottom here is Almere and Rotterdam Central Station. So all of these are hubs. They all combine, not very much related to cars, but they all combine all these different functions and all these different modalities within a central node into the city. And what they actually all, these four also show is that they come from different times. So Amsterdam is by far the oldest. Then you have Almere and Lelystad were about the same time. And then the more recent one is Rotterdam. So also I will try to explain to you what this transition in time has meant to the hubs we are used to today. So going all the way back to the 19th century, where the first train stations were built in the Netherlands, we have on one side we have Leeuwarden, and on the other side we have Amsterdam. And you can actually see in this image already that the hubs already started as hubs very long time ago. Otherwise, we didn't really call them hubs by then, just a train station. But you can see on the images, there are a lot of people there, but also chariots, wagons, and horses, all gathering into this central point in the central station within the city. But if you look at it more from an architecture point of view, you can also see that both of them are quite different. So Leeuwarden and underneath there Zwolle, they are more of a standardization station. And next to it is Amsterdam. And does anyone know the one below Amsterdam? That used to be Rotterdam Central Station. So it's quite different from how it is now. But what we see is that a lot of these stations in Netherlands, still a lot of the stations in the Netherlands are related to this standard design, and just a few are this special design. So we can clearly tell that the special design are more rare. Then that happens because the municipalities, if they had more money and if they wanted to make more of an important entrance to the city, they would invest more and create this more interesting station as a gateway to the city. But looking at this standardization, in the 19th century they make like a IKEA catalogus where they would design one of these stations. And it really works as some kind of trademark, a vision, that way if you go to a city, you immediately see such a station. It's really recognizable to the people that come to there, and really immediately identify this as a station itself. But also it's very quick to build and therefore also relatively cheap, which is still things used today. But as we see that these stations, we have different kinds of stations like Reuver you just saw in the beginning in the bottom left, and comparison to Zwolle. They both came from this standardization design, but are completely different in size, because Zwolle is a way bigger city, has a lot more people there using the city, and also is really a lot more connected to the rest of the Netherlands than Reuver, which is just actually a quite small station near a local village. So determining the site really determines how big the station is, and you can still see that today, for instance here in Eindhoven, it's way bigger than Strijp S, where a lot of less people are using it. But also this standardization came with a lot of challenges. They came from this idea that they could be placed somewhat everywhere, with the idea of the upcoming railway investments, but they were instantly, or most of them were instantly too small just after the realization of it. So that had to be made a lot of adjustments to be able to fit them to the amount of people and the amount of goods that it could be trafficking. But yeah, the urban fabric around it was not really adjusted to these adjustments. So there was a lot of pressure, and the stations didn't really fit into their sites anymore. So there was a really thing which happened to mostly all these standardization stations. And another thing is that because the train station and the tracks were built on the ground floor, it was really a barrier into the city. So either they were built on the edge of the city, and the city could not expand towards the station or beyond the station, or they were built between two cities, and there was actually barely any linkage between the city himself. So there's also really a problem with these stations from the 19th century. So if you take a jump to the 60s, we see that a lot more people started using cars. Cars was a really affordable and gave a lot of freedom to the people that were using it. So a lot of more people started using cars, which of course had an impact on the use of trains. They somewhat became less popular. People started enjoying more the freedom of the cars and being able to go everywhere they want. And the train, you have to go to a specific point. It's either too late or it's a bit slower. You have to depart on certain times. It's a bit less attractive. So there was really a losing battle of the train itself. But not long after, it's actually changed already, because also the urban fabric, just as the same as the stations, the cars, there were not too many roads. So with a lot of cars, with a lot of people using cars, there were huge traffic jams. And also with the oil crises in the 70s, cars became way more expensive, and also way more drawbacks, because who else wants to wait on the streets while people are just standing there or something, doing whatever. So the train companies really saw this as a potential turnaround, something they could use for a change. They wanted to make real infrastructure bigger again, want to use this turnaround point really to invest and to make it more attractive. So they built all these new tracks on these railway stations, connecting to the existing tracks, of course, to increase the time, decrease the time that would take from one station to another, but also make it more accessible to all people. And of course, on these nodes, new train stations had to be built, or some got demolished in the Second World War, such as Rotterdam. So new train stations had to be built there. And of course, they learned from the mistakes of the past with the standardization. So they invited new, younger architects to really rethink the idea and the typology of the station itself. And one major part is they didn't want it to be a barrier in the city. They wanted the cities were continually expanding, and then therefore the city or the train station could not be a barrier within the city itself. And then they came up with this new kind of typology, which is the Hightech architecture, as they like to call it. And you can really see a lot of resemblance between all these different examples. For instance, Almere, Lelystad, and Sloterdijk on the bottom, but also the old station of Schiphol. It came some sort of at the same time as the brutalist architecture, so really showing the structure and showing this hierarchy, but for public buildings. So everything had to be transparent. You have to be able to look outside to see people, but also really know how this is constructively built. And this hierarchy is also really shown, as you can see in Almere, with the different color and applying different color to each mode of construction, either as a detail or an add-on or a central part of construction. And you might not really know the high-tech architecture, but this is one very clear example of high-tech architecture, which is of course the Centre Pompidou in Paris, which uses the exact same system. But the major part of what they changed, apart from the looks and how they feel, how the experiences to the traveler, they lifted all the stations and the tracks above from the streets, so that the city could easily cross between both sides. So they used the viaduct, and we can also see on the picture here that underneath the viaduct it's quite dark, so it's not the nicest space to be in, but at least there is no barrier anymore, and you could just walk or take your car or take your horse or whatever and go from one side to the other. And this actually also meant that it was very efficient crossover, very efficient as a hub, going from the train to a bus, for example, because the bus can be parked right underneath the viaduct, and you just had to walk down the stairs and immediately could step into your bus and go to your next destination. Something they also really learned about is, okay, this flexibility that went really wrong with the standardization. We already have to think okay, how can we incorporate this within our designs? How can we make our design somewhat future-proof, really on on the scale of transportation and the people that use it, so that almost all stations can be relatively easily could be doubled for the amount of capacity and amount of people that were going there. So really also thinking forward, not having this huge impact in the station itself, that the city itself and the fabric around it is really adjusted towards the future. And this flexibility is not only on the tracks itself, the amount of trains or the amount of transportation of people, but also in the overspace underneath the viaduct. Because it is this grid structure, there's a lot of openness, which can later be filled in with all different kinds of needs and functions that the future would find needed. So if we look at the train station from that time, we really see that the city is able to connect to both sides. It's not this barrier within the city anymore, but it's really the city could actually evolve and to grow around the city station, really using it as a central hub of mobility to get around and to connect to other cities. But then if we look at stations and hubs today, so 21st century, we also see that there are different challenges. Because flexibility, which really stands to the core of this high-tech station design, has become very pressurized. Because we have a lot of new modes of transportation, but also more trains, more trams, more buses. So they need more space. But also the demographic has changed. Also more people are using these modes of transportation, and very big challenges on sustainability, where making it more climate-proof, more integrated. They all need a lot of space, while the urban context in the city is actually quite cramped and quite tight already. So how do we think of this new station typology? We have to rethink it again in a way to more integrate it with the city. So the train station and the city somehow merge. For instance, you can see in Rotterdam Central Station that the shops, and also in Eindhoven here, that the shops are going through the station. You can also buy something to drink, you can buy something to eat, but also go to HEMA or buy some clothes, whatever. So actually, the city kind of channels from one side to the other side, really through the station. The only bad thing is that NS decided to put in the check-in gates. This really takes down the concept a bit. But they really try to merge the city within the station itself. And you can also see that, for instance, in Utrecht Central Station, where on the left on the balcony you could have a drink, eat something, and on the right side there are a lot of travelers. You're actually visually in one space, but without any barrier between it. So they really combine this all into one space, also to make it a lot more active and a lot more attractive to other people coming there. And as a result, you also see that municipalities really want to go into these hotspots. They want to, of course, expose that they are pro the new, more sustainable ways of traveling, but also want to attach to these hotspots because actually the cities or the train stations become cities by themselves. Really a central hub with all these connections within one building in itself. So for instance, Utrecht and Delft have their municipalities within the train station itself. And this potential turnaround, which came from like at the start of the high-tech stations, really lived on. They want to, people want to get the car out of the city and really give it a quality impulse. So this is Utrecht, not super long ago. There was this 6-lane carway through the center of the city, where there used to be a canal, and they changed it back to a waterway to take the car out of the city and give it more quality to the people, more nature, more green, more water, really giving an impulse, and actually quite nice area to be in nowadays. But of course, we can all idealize that the use of trains, that everyone will use the trains or public transport, but there will still be a lot of cars and still be a lot of people connecting from one side or one city to another city. And with these new things, such as you just have seen in Utrecht, there's less space for the cars, but people still want to make use of this. So a new type of hub actually emerges, more at the outskirts of the city, there where you can place your car and then go on to more public transport, such as the tram, a metro or a bus, and then be directly connected to the city center. So in a way, nowadays we see somewhat kind of a network approaching that you could either you could park your car on the edge of the city and then be instantly connected by a very quick connection to the center of the city. So you can see that the city is also growing and expanding, but also in a positive way of mobility and accessibility for all the people. And the benefit of creating hubs on the edge of the city is that they have way more space and way more area to be, to have activities in rather than the city center. So you can add like sporting facilities such as the climbing wall or just group lesson sporting facilities. Both were added in the park and ride in Utrecht. And the benefit it gives is that if you just park your car in a parking garage, it becomes quite of a dead space. It's quite of a ghost town in a way. You're just there for 2 minutes and you leave. And if you add these sporting facilities or areas where people stay longer than a couple of minutes, just stay an hour or stay longer, you have some sort of feeling of social security, and the space becomes way nicer and way easier to live in. So in a way, in a transition in time, we really see that the city and the hubs are merging in a way and also creating much more of a network throughout the city with bigger hubs, smaller hubs, central hubs, and more on the outskirts of the city, really more developing this part that the city is completely a network rather than just one central point connecting to the other sides of the city. Then if we look beyond, so where we are today and look to the future, we really see that the most important issue we are working with right now is, of course, the climate change. And this is a heat map which shows that the heat stress in the city, which is the big red spots in there, which actually coincide with the city centers with a lot of buildings, a lot of stone, and also these areas are the worst for water with either floods or extreme droughts. So those are really the challenges we are facing today. And you can see that municipalities and small streets are trying to change this by adding a lot of green space. So the green can be a buffer for water, but also a buffer for the heat. But what we do see in the streets is if you normally would order either thuisbezorgd or you would go and buy clothes or buy a package online, a truck would go or a car would go into your streets and would be delivered by a door. But if you change the entire street model to more of a green model, there is actually no space anymore. So what you then need is a new type of hub, some sort of more of a local hub in your city, where a truck with a lot of packages for the entire neighborhood would come and would drop it all off, and then from this local hub, there would be either a small car or a bakfiets just traveling it to either your door, or even you can pick it up yourself, because the hubs can be a way more combination also with combination of functions and really be a more of this positive effect also on the climate. If you add a lot of green, perhaps in a park, they can be really integrated into their surroundings. But actually also these hubs, they need to get their packages somewhere, because the chain is, if you solve it locally, you get a problem somewhere else. So also the packages need to be delivered here, and unfortunately the drones are not that good at still, perhaps in the future. But there need to be more large-scale logistical hubs on the edge of the city, so very close to perhaps, such as here in Amsterdam, where there will be boats with a lot of packages delivering it to these central facilities, and then they can distribute it to the smaller local hubs in your neighborhood. but you can already see, if you see the scale of the cars next to it, or if you know such an oil or gas deposit, they're really big. So this building is huge. That also poses a lot of challenges, both to arrange the logistics for all these streams of goods coming in and going out, but also more visually, how do you make such a thing which is this big into its surroundings and really fit it into its site in itself. So that's really a challenge if you're working with buildings of these scales, even way more than buildings on a more local level or a small scale for more residential. But also, if you look at these hubs, because there are a lot of people coming there, such as this will be built in Dordrecht. It's the bicycle parking right next to the station. Because a lot of people will be going there and a lot of people will be using it, if you use it well and if you design it well with, like, for instance, more wood than steel or concrete, you can also really make this positive impact in terms of material, really having it a positive impact on the site surrounding it and on the vision of people. Because if you always go to buildings without just concrete, really not integrated into its site, and really doing a bad job at climate proofing, you will not get turn around yourself. And if you meet a lot of these buildings which do have a very positive effect, the minds of the people might change as well and really think further in designing. And you can either do this with materials or also with green. So adding a lot of green with different kinds of flower, different kinds of bushes and trees, that of course reduces the heat stress, is a water storage or buffer, but also helps very much in the biodiversity of an area and really makes an area improve by itself. But also really looking back, what we learned from the flexibility at the standardization stations, we also really need to look at the future. So probably in the future there will be new modes of transportation such as the Hyperloop or some things we might not even know yet. How do we integrate these within our current systems and within our current networks without them exploding or really be disintegrated from each other? So that's also always something we have to keep in mind and keep looking towards the future. So how can we integrate these new modes of mobility within our current networks? So if we look at the evolution of the hubs and the train stations from time, we really started at this barrier, which had a lot of negativity. Some look nice, some were just an ordinary standardization. We really made a jump towards where the city could just pass under freely, and the train station and the train rails were on a different level. So quite split, but not a barrier, to where we are today, where there's a completely integrated network of all different hubs and mobilities scattered around the entire city. So they really made a lot of progress in the last hundreds of years. But looking at this, these multi-scaled hubs, this network around the city, of course we then see all these different kinds of, we see the larger ones, we see the smaller ones, but also we really have to think about the challenges that they still have. So really looking at this sustainable circular design, the scale to impact it on the surroundings itself, and also looking at the flexibility of the future and possible new modes of transportation that will be introduced. So if you see these four now, same as the opening slide, you perhaps know more that the station or the parking garage is never just a hub on its own, but it's really a network very much connected to all different sides of the city. And then also if you look at these quite recent projects that are yet to be built, the left one will be the station of Hightech, which will be built in a couple of years. You might also appreciate more what we've all learned from the past and what we can also still learn from these very small standardization stations like Reuver. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming. If you have any other questions to Gijs, don't be afraid to come to the front and just talk with him. As a thank you, I have a gift from Geops. It's our magazine and a bottle of wine. Thank you. For everyone that needs my future points, in the back there are papers where you can write on your student number because the scanners are broken. So only write down your own student number because otherwise it's fraud. Otherwise, there are still some sandwiches left, so if you're still hungry, get one.